The rain had been falling all afternoon, heavy and stubborn, drenching the cracked sidewalks of a town that still held its breath whenever someone different walked through. The gutters hissed with runoff. The wind pushed leaves into corners like forgotten debris. And inside the old corner store on Walton Street, the air smelled of coffee, dust, and slow decay. The bell above the glass door gave a tired chime as he walked in. Heads turned. Then, quickly, they looked away. He was big, too big for the narrow aisles, too quiet for the tension he carried. His hoodie was soaked and sagged against wide shoulders. Mud clung to the edges of his jeans, his boots heavy from long steps in the rain. But it was the ink that made people uneasy. Black tattoos snaked up his neck, wrapped around his hands, curled over his knuckles like questions no one wanted answered. His face was all edges and silence. Scar over the brow, jaw set tight, no smile, no words. He didn't browse. He didn't loiter. He walked to the back cooler, opened the creaking glass door, and pulled out a single bottle of water. When he turned around, his eyes swept the room just once, and something about the way he did it made everyone return to their business a little too quickly. Like prey pretending not to notice the wolf. A woman near the magazine rack cleared her throat and moved closer to the counter, clutching her purse without realizing it. A man by the gum display shuffled closer to the exit, one hand halfway in his jacket pocket, the other holding a soda he no longer wanted. Behind the register, Maria gripped the drawer a little too tight. He set the water bottle down, didn't say a word, pulled out a folded $5 bill, smoothed it on the counter with calloused fingers, and slid it across. The movement was quiet, almost careful, like he'd done this 1,000 times but still wasn't sure how people would react. Maria nodded. Her voice caught somewhere in her throat before she said, "Keep the change." He gave the faintest nod, almost imperceptible, then picked up the bottle and turned to leave. Luis, her son, peeked from the storeroom. Maria glanced back at him and shook her head slightly. Not now. The door chimed again as he stepped back into the rain. But instead of walking off, he stood under the awning for a few seconds, the bottle still unopened in his hand. He looked out into the street, not watching anything in particular, just standing there, like someone waiting for a world that never quite invited him in. No one knew his name. No one asked. People just called him the tattooed guy or the tall one or that man with the prison eyes. He hadn't done anything wrong. Not once. He always paid in cash. Never stole. Never yelled. Never touched anyone or said anything out of line. But he didn't smile. And he didn't explain himself. And in this part of town, silence was often filled with stories no one bothered to verify. Some said he was ex-con. Others swore they saw a gang symbol on his knuckles. A few remembered him from that night years ago, though no one could agree on what that night was. They just agreed he didn't belong. Truth didn't matter here. What mattered was that when he walked into a room, the atmosphere shifted. Like the barometric pressure dropped just enough to make everyone's instincts go on high alert. That was enough for most people. Maria watched from behind the counter as he disappeared down the street, shoulders hunched against the storm. She didn't know why her heart beat faster when he entered. Maybe it was the tattoos. Maybe it was the stories she overheard. Maybe it was something in her past she didn't like to remember. But whatever it was, it had taken root. Luis finally spoke. Quietly. "He's not like they say." Maria didn't reply. She just flipped the switch behind the counter, dimming the store lights. One hand lingered on the drawer. The other wiped down the counter, slow and thoughtful. Outside, the last glimmer of his silhouette vanished into the gray curtain of rain. And the town, just like it always did, went right back to whispering. They didn't know his name, but they all had a version of his story. In a town where routine was religion and anything unfamiliar felt like a threat, he was a sermon people repeated in hushed tones, half-truths and raised eyebrows. The tattooed guy? Yeah, he's trouble. You can see it. Used to be a bouncer, killed a man, I heard. Got off on a technicality. Don't be fooled by the quiet ones. They snap. It didn't matter that no one had ever seen him do anything wrong. All it took was his shadow falling across the doorway for a mother to pull her child close or for a shopkeeper to suddenly remember to check the security cameras. Fear, after all, doesn't ask for evidence. It just finds the nearest target and starts drawing lines. He walked through the neighborhood like a rumor with legs, broad-shouldered, head down, always watching but never seen. The tattoos made up most of the conversation. Heavy black ink that coiled over his knuckles and crept up his neck like vines reaching for light. People didn't stop to see what they were: names, dates, a lion's head faded with age. They just saw symbols they didn't recognize and decided it meant danger. But Rosa, the elderly woman who lived above the laundromat, noticed more. She once caught a glimpse of him helping Eddie, the veteran who slept behind the bowling alley, gather his rain-soaked blankets. No one else would have bothered. But the tattooed man had stopped, picked up the man's Bible, and placed it gently back in his cart. "He's not like they think," she said once at the pharmacy, while others rolled their eyes. "He's just tired." Rosa remembered tired. She had seen it in her husband's eyes after the war. And she saw it now, in this man who barely spoke, whose gaze carried the weight of someone who had lived two lives and lost both. Still, the fear held firm. People watched from windows when he walked by. Store owners braced themselves. Conversations paused. Even Maria, who ran the corner store he often visited, wasn't immune. She told herself it was just caution. She had a teenage son to protect, a store to keep safe, bills that didn't care for kindness. And so, she watched him closely, closer than the others in fact, but not because she believed the rumors. She just couldn't afford to be wrong. The corner store had been her husband's before the cancer took him. He built it from nothing, just a cash register and a prayer. Maria had kept it running since his passing. She wore grief the way some people wore aprons, always on, always stained. And while others spread gossip, she remembered something her husband used to say: "People ain't always what they seem. Some got shadows that walk ahead of them. But shadows don't define the man. His choices do." She repeated that now, sometimes aloud when the fear crept too close. And yet, the instinct to protect never fully left her. Luis had started asking questions. Why does he always come at the same time? Why doesn't he talk to anyone? Why does everyone look at him like that? Maria didn't have good answers. Only guesses. Only the hope that she wasn't reading the situation wrong. Because it wasn't just about fear anymore. It was about survival. The store had been slipping, fewer customers, more theft, credit running thin. Maria worked long hours, closed late, opened early, and counted the till twice just to be sure. She had no time for charity, no margin for error. And yet, every time he walked in, something in her paused. Not in fear, not entirely, but in recognition of what, she wasn't sure. One night, she saw him walking ahead of her down Walton Street. The wind had picked up, and plastic bags scraped across the pavement like ghosts. She stayed back a little. Then she saw him stop, right in front of her, bend down and pick up a child's toy, a small stuffed bear, wet and worn. He looked at it for a moment, then placed it gently on a stoop, as if returning it to where it belonged. He kept walking. Maria stood there longer than she should have, the echo of her husband's old phrase rising in her mind again. Shadows don't define the man. His choices do. That night, she left a few extra paper towels by the register, the kind she knew he always grabbed when he thought no one was looking. It wasn't an invitation. Not yet. But it wasn't suspicion either. It was something in between. The kind of space that grief makes when it begins to consider forgiveness. The next time he came in, she didn't flinch. Luis still watched him closely, but not like before. Now it was with questions in his eyes, and maybe even a flicker of admiration. And the man, whose name still no one knew, took his bottle of water, nodded, and paused, just briefly. He seemed like he wanted to say something, but the moment passed. He left without a word. Out on the street, the rain had stopped. But inside that store, the storm was only beginning to shift. Maria Alvarez had learned long ago that strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was getting up before dawn to check the inventory before Luis left for school. Sometimes it was smiling at customers even when her lower back ached and the rent notice on the fridge was 2 weeks old. And sometimes, strength was simply pretending the ache in her chest wasn't loneliness, just tiredness. Everyone said she was strong after Manny died. But strength wasn't what it felt like. It felt like drowning slowly in shallow water. No panic, just a quiet sinking that never ended. She wore her grief in silence, folded it neatly between stacks of invoices and handwritten lists taped beside the register. Her husband had been the heart of the store, the one who joked with customers and bargained with delivery drivers. Maria was the spine, straight, rigid, holding everything together. And now, spine or not, she bore the weight alone. The sign still read Manny's Market, though the M was starting to flicker on and off, as if unsure it still belonged. She hadn't changed it, couldn't. Not because she was sentimental, but because changing it felt like admitting he was gone for good. The store was his echo. The aisles still carried the rhythm of his footsteps, especially after closing, when she turned off the lights and was the only heartbeat left in the building. But things were changing, and not for the better. The neighborhood had grown meaner around the edges. Rent went up, petty thefts rose, and regulars stopped coming by as often. Chain stores down the block offered cheaper prices. Maria couldn't compete with that, not with her aging freezer and rusted back door. But she didn't have time to grieve the business the way she grieved her husband. She still had Luis, 17, with dreams too big for a neighborhood this small. He wanted to study engineering, build something that lasted. But every week he worked longer shifts, stayed later, offered to help her count the register. She knew what that meant. He saw her failing. He didn't say it, but he saw it. In the thinning produce, in the creak of her joints, in the way her hands trembled slightly when the till didn't balance. He didn't blame her, but he was preparing for something. A life beyond the corner store. A life that didn't require holding everything together with duct tape and prayer. Maria loved that about him, but it terrified her too, because when he left it would just be her, and a store full of ghosts. That's why she noticed the tattooed man more than she let on. He came around the same time now, mid-afternoon, right after school let out. He never talked much, but he nodded at Luis once. That surprised her. Luis nodded back. Maria didn't say anything, but that moment lingered longer than it should have. It unsettled her. Not because she distrusted the man, but because she didn't know if she should trust her instincts anymore. Was he really dangerous? Or was she just exhausted? She started paying closer attention to the details. He never came in when the store was busy. Always waited until it was quiet. He stood at the corner of the room, never blocking anyone's path. He didn't wear earbuds or scroll through a phone. He just stood there, watching, waiting, alert but not tense. It wasn't just habit. It was awareness, a kind she recognized. Maria had seen that look before, on the faces of patients who returned from combat, in the eyes of nurses who'd seen too much death. It was the look of someone who didn't expect to be safe, only ready when they weren't. One rainy Thursday, after the man left, Luis broke the silence behind the register. "He's not like they say," he said. Maria glanced up. "He always rounds up when he pays," Luis added. "You noticed that?" Maria nodded but didn't speak. "He helped Mr. Simmons the other day," Luis continued. "His cart tipped over. No one else even looked. But he stopped." Maria wanted to dismiss it, wanted to remind her son of all the times good intentions masked dangerous people. But instead, she found herself saying, "He doesn't talk much." Luis smiled faintly. "Neither do you." They both laughed, soft and brief. That night, after closing, Maria stood alone again behind the counter, looking at the camera footage. Something she rarely did unless something had been stolen. She watched the man enter, watched him pause before choosing a bottle of water, watched how he gently returned a can someone had knocked over. She hit rewind, played it again, watched slower this time. He didn't know he was being recorded. And yet, there was care in the way he moved. Not caution, respect. That realization did something to her. The next morning, she made fresh tamales, a batch too big for just her and Luis. She packed a few in foil and left them near the counter. didn't label them, didn't say they were for anyone in particular. But when the tattooed man came in that afternoon, he saw them. Hesitated. She didn't look up, just rang up his water like always. He took a tamale on his way out. Didn't say anything. But when the door closed behind him, Maria realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of being wrong, not even of the change she knew was coming. It started as coincidence. The man would come in around 3:40 p.m. every weekday, just after the afternoon rush died down, just before the sun began its descent behind the hardware store across the street. At first, Maria didn't notice the pattern, but Luis did. "He's always on time," he said one day, half joking. Like, creepy punctual. Maria didn't respond, but the words lingered with her. The next afternoon, when the bell above the door gave its now familiar chime, she looked at the clock. 3:42. Not creepy, just reliable. The man entered like always, shoulders broad, hood still damp from misting rain, boots tapping gently on the floor tiles. He gave the store a quiet once-over before heading to the cooler. One bottle of water, always the same brand. But today he paused on the way to the counter. The little girl by the snack shelf had dropped a bag of rice crackers. Her mother hadn't noticed. She was busy scolding someone on the phone. The man bent down, picked it up and placed it back on the shelf, the way someone might return a sleeping baby to a crib. Then he kept walking. No one saw it, except Luis. "Did you see that?" he whispered when the man left. Maria had, but she said nothing, just wiped the counter a little more slowly than usual. The man was becoming a fixture now, like the flickering M in Manny's Market, or the old register drawer that stuck every fourth time. Customers had started to notice too. Not all of them liked it. "I don't like the way he watches everything," an older woman muttered one morning, digging through her purse for quarters. "He doesn't even blink," another said, barely whispering. "Just stands there, arms crossed, like he's casing the place." Maria wanted to defend him, but she didn't, not out loud. Instead, she found herself thinking about the way he returned that can of soup last week. The way he waited until the store was empty before approaching the counter. The way his eyes always flicked first to the exit. Not with suspicion, but with awareness. It was how someone moved when they'd spent time in places where you didn't turn your back to anyone. Prisons, hospitals, war zones. Maria didn't know which it was, but she recognized trauma when she saw it. And more importantly, she recognized restraint. One evening, a kid darted into the store chasing a bounced basketball, nearly ran into a customer, knocked over a crate of oranges. Everyone froze except the man. He stepped forward, caught the rolling fruit, handed it back to Maria without a word, and gently patted the boy's shoulder before stepping back to his usual corner. Luis grinned. "You sure he's not secretly your new stock boy?" Maria smiled but didn't answer. Something had changed. The man, still nameless, still wordless, had become part of the store's rhythm. Not just expected but depended on. Not just tolerated, but quietly appreciated. And Maria, without ever admitting it, had started to look forward to his presence. Not because she needed help, but because when he was there, she felt less alone. The silence that used to stretch between her and Luis after school now had a third presence. One that didn't speak, but somehow filled the space. She started preparing for him in small ways. A bottle of water already waiting on the counter. A napkin tucked beside the tamales, just in case he took one again. A stool, left near the side wall, where he sometimes stood and leaned without ever asking to sit. It wasn't kindness. Not entirely. It was respect. A quiet recognition between people who had both lost too much to say everything out loud. Luis began to notice things, too. "He watches the door," he said one afternoon. "Every time someone comes in. He sees things before they happen," Maria replied softly. "That's not a threat. That's training." Luis nodded. "You think he was a soldier?" he asked. Maria didn't answer right away, but her mind went to the way he stood. One foot back, hands relaxed but ready, like someone trained to scan and wait, not react. If he was, she said. He came back with his guards still up, and then one day the routine broke. But not in a bad way. It was Tuesday. The man entered as usual, picked up his water, then lingered. He didn't leave after 2 minutes. Instead, he stood quietly near the register, eyes occasionally flicking to the front window. Not nervous, just still. Maria glanced at him. He nodded once. She nodded back. No words were exchanged. But something settled in her that day, a certainty she hadn't expected. He wasn't there to buy water. He was watching the store, watching them, and not because he wanted anything, because he was preparing for something. They just didn't know what yet. It was the kind of night that made you feel forgotten. The rain wasn't heavy, but it lingered, persistent, cold, like a hand pressing against the back of your neck. It streamed down the windows of Manny's Market, blurring the view of the empty sidewalk outside. Inside, the lights flickered once, then steadied, casting the store in a pale, weary glow. Maria stood behind the register, shoulders tight, rubbing the ache in her lower back with one hand while the other counted crumpled bills from the drawer. The numbers weren't good. Again. Luis was in the back, pushing a mop across the old tile floor, earbuds in, humming faintly to a song Maria couldn't hear. The store was quiet, too quiet, and then, as if on cue, the door chime rang. She didn't even need to look up. 3:43 p.m. Right on time. The man entered, hood pulled low, drops of rain glistening like sweat on his jacket. His presence had become expected now, not disruptive, not threatening, just constant. He gave the room a glance, the same way he always did, slow, careful, reading everything in a single scan. His eyes lingered on Maria for just a beat longer than usual. She nodded. He nodded back. He walked to the cooler, grabbed a bottle of water, then paused. Again. He wasn't moving like usual. Instead of walking to the counter, he stopped near the magazine rack. Still, listening, like a deer catching a sound no one else had heard yet. Outside, the rain picked up, and then the second chime. It was violent, the door crashing open like a warning shot. A figure surged through the entrance, younger, lean, jittery. A ski mask clung to his face, soaked and sagging. His left hand gripped a pistol. His right trembled. "Nobody move!" he screamed. Maria's heart jumped. She dropped the coins in her hand. They clattered like a warning bell against the counter. Luis yanked out his earbuds, frozen in place. He was 10 steps away. Too far. Too close. The gunman waved the weapon wildly. "Open the register. Now!" Maria's voice stuck in her throat. Her hands moved slowly, instinctively. The man didn't. He stood straight now, no longer part of the wall. He stepped forward. Quiet. Measured. "Don't," he said. Calm. Firm. The word was a command, not a plea. The gunman turned. "What?" I said, "Don't." Another step. Still controlled. Still measured. The gun wavered. Maria watched, eyes wide. Her hands hovered over the drawer, frozen. Luis had dropped the mop, and now took a slow step toward her. Toward the counter, toward the gun. "Back off," the robber barked. "I'll shoot." The man didn't flinch. "Not like that, you won't." The air changed. It was no longer fear holding the room hostage. It was tension, electric, fragile. The man raised his hands slowly. "You don't want to do this. You don't even know how to hold that thing. Your fingers already on the trigger. You're scared. That's how people get hurt." The words didn't come from panic. They came from experience. And that's what finally pushed the robber over. He lunged. The gun jerked toward Maria. And the man moved. It was all one motion, explosive, practiced. A blur of movement honed by years of repetition. He closed the distance, knocked the gun arm wide just as the shot went off. Bang! The bullet shattered a fluorescent light. The store flickered into half-darkness. Glass sprayed across the counter. Luis ducked. Maria screamed. Then silence. The gun clattered to the floor. The man had the attacker pinned. One arm twisted behind his back, the other hand gripping the collar of his jacket. The would-be thief bucked, thrashed, but it was useless. The man didn't hit him, didn't yell, just held him down until the boy stopped moving. Heavy breathing filled the space. Rain beat louder against the roof. The fridge buzzed faintly. Maria didn't even realize she was crying until Luis pulled her down behind the counter. Then she saw it. Blood, seeping through the man's hoodie. His left side. Luis was already at his side. "Sir, hey, you're hurt." The man looked down, touched his ribs. His fingers came away red. "Just a graze," he muttered. "I've had worse." He staggered slightly. Maria grabbed a rag from under the counter and rushed to him. "You need a hospital," she said, voice shaking. "No hospitals," he said. "I sharp now. Not with fear, with history. No questions." Luis looked at his mother. "He saved us." Maria nodded. "I know." They helped him sit. The adrenaline drained quickly from his face, and his breath turned shallow. The police came fast. Sirens bloomed in the distance, flashing lights painting the storefront in waves of blue and red. The young gunman was arrested, barely older than Luis. He wept the whole time. First-time offender. Stolen weapon. No plan. The officers turned to the man, asked for his name. He said nothing. One officer stepped closer. "You military?" The man's eyes narrowed. "Used to be," he said. "Not anymore." They let him go. For now. Maria patched the wound in the back office with the first aid kit she hadn't touched in years. He sat still, jaw clenched, but eyes calm. "You knew exactly what to do," she said quietly. "You were trained." He didn't reply. "Why come back every day?" Luis asked. "Why just stand there?" The man finally looked up. "Because I've done things I can't take back," he said. "But I can still watch over something that's good." Maria blinked. He looked at her. Not with apology. Not with pride. Just honesty. "My name's Jamal," he said. "Figured you should know." The blood had dried by morning, but the questions remained. Jamal stayed through the night. Not because he wanted to, but because Maria wouldn't let him leave. Not with a bandage barely clinging to a gunshot wound and his breath still uneven. She gave him the cot in the storeroom, one that hadn't been used since Manny's cousins stayed over a Christmas long past. Luis brought him soup in a styrofoam cup, sat beside him without saying much. They didn't need to speak. The silence was full of things that didn't require translation, things like trust and trauma and gratitude too big for words. In the morning, the rain had stopped. The sky still hung low and gray, as if unsure what came next. Maria brewed a fresh pot of coffee and brought a steaming mug into the back. Jamal was sitting upright now, shoulder wrapped, shirt off. In the morning light, his tattoos looked softer, less like armor, more like stories. Names lined his left forearm: Carter, Vasquez, Delaney. Beside each name, a date, not of birth, of death. Luis came in, leaned in the doorway. "Is that your unit?" he asked quietly. Jamal looked down. "They were. Once." Maria set the mug on the table. "You don't have to tell us anything, but I think we're ready to listen if you ever do." Jamal was quiet for a long time. Then slowly he spoke. "I joined the army at 19. No parents. No money. I just needed out." A pause. "Turned out I was good at war. Not so good at coming home." His eyes fixed on the wall, like he was watching something far away. "We were in Kandahar. Night patrol. I signed off on a route that wasn't cleared. I knew the risks, but we were tired, stretched thin. I made the call anyway." He didn't need to say what happened next. Maria sat down. Luis didn't move. "3 didn't make it," Jamal said. "I wrote the letters to their families myself. I stopped sleeping after that." He ran his fingers across a long, pale scar on his ribs. A reminder. "I stayed in for 3 more years. They gave me medals, called me honorable. But all I could think was, if I was really honorable, I wouldn't be the one still breathing." Maria's voice was steady. "So you came back?" He nodded. "To nothing. I had no one left. My mother passed while I was deployed. Friends moved on. The world felt smaller, tighter, louder. Luis asked, "What about the tattoos?" Jamal gave the faintest smile. "Carter's name was the first. We made a pact that we'd get each other's names if anything happened. I didn't expect to be the one doing it alone." He pointed to the cross on his chest. "That's for my mom. She always said if I got lost, God would know where to find me." Maria's fingers tightened slightly around her coffee mug. "There's one here," Jamal said, gesturing to his ribs. "From my daughter." Luis blinked. "You have a daughter?" Jamal nodded. "Had. She was 6 when I got locked up." The room changed. Maria's voice softened. "What happened?" "Wrong place. Wrong people. One fight. One man with a knife. They said it was self-defense, but I couldn't prove it. Did 4 years." He looked at his hands. "By the time I got out, her mother had moved. No forwarding address. No phone." His eyes shone, but he didn't cry. "I stopped looking. Didn't feel like I had the right to anymore." Silence settled thick. Maria reached for something, not words, not sympathy. Something more human. She placed a hand gently over his wrist. He didn't pull away. "You protected my son," she said. "You protected me. You still have something to give." He looked down at her hand, then at Luis, then finally, looked at himself. "You think people will see that?" he asked. Luis answered before Maria could. "They will if we say it loud enough." Later that day, Maria walked out to the counter as the store opened. Her hand lingered on the bell above the door, the same one that had chimed before the robbery. She could still hear the sound of the gunshot, the panic, the thud of fists against tile. But more than that, she heard the calm in Jamal's voice, the steadiness of his hands, and the truth in his silence. She printed out a small sign and taped it to the window. "To the man who stood in front of a gun to protect us, we see you, and we thank you. M&L." That evening, Jamal returned. Not as a shadow, not as a rumor. He wore the gray Manny's Market t-shirt, still wrinkled, still a little loose around the arms. But it fit him in a way that nothing else had in years. Maria handed him a broom. "We're short on help," she said. "Hope you don't mind sweeping." Jamal looked at her, then at Luis. He took the broom and smiled. In a town as small and tightly woven as theirs, word traveled faster than rain down a drainpipe. But this story, this one moved differently. At first, it drifted through whispers. Not quite believed, not quite dismissed. They said the tattooed man, the one no one knew, the one who never smiled, had stepped in front of a loaded gun for the store owner and her boy. Some didn't believe it. Some didn't want to. "He probably started it," a man at the mechanics muttered. "Guys like that always bring trouble with them." But others, especially those who'd once feared him the most, started to wonder. Was it true? They walked past Manny's Market and saw the hand-printed sign taped to the front window. The one Maria wrote herself in her even looping script. "To the man who stood in front of a gun to protect us, we see you, and we thank you. M&L." The ones who read it carefully almost always looked inside. Sometimes they caught a glimpse of him, Jamal, sweeping the floor, stacking milk crates, showing Luis how to line up cans evenly. And when he turned, and they saw his face, not scowling, not hardened, just focused, something in them shifted. Not all at once, but enough. An older woman came in and bought eggs. On her way out, she paused. "I remember that boy you used to be," she said to Jamal, her voice unsure. "Your mama used to bring you to church down on 8th Street. Jamal looked up. He hadn't heard that name, 8th Street Pentecostal, in over 20 years. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. "That was a long time ago." She nodded. "She was a good woman. Then she left. That was it." But Jamal stood a little straighter the rest of the day. The kindness came in small doses. One afternoon, a teenage girl offered him a granola bar and whispered, "Thank you for helping Ms. Maria. My grandma shops here." A boy pointed to the tattoo on Jamal's forearm and asked, "Is that a dragon?" "No," Jamal said, smiling. "That's a lion." "Cool," the boy said, then ran off. Luis started asking more questions during slow hours. What was the hardest part about coming back? Jamal thought a long time. Knowing everything had changed, except me. Luis nodded. That's how I feel about high school. They both laughed, short and honest. Maria watched these moments from behind the counter. She didn't intrude. She just let them happen. Because she knew healing wasn't something you demanded. It was something you witnessed. Still, not everyone came around. Someone scratched graffiti onto the back wall one night. Thugs don't become saints. Maria scrubbed it off herself. Didn't even tell Luis. But Jamal saw it. The next morning, he arrived early and painted the wall clean. White again, clean and quiet, like it had never been touched. And then there were those who just watched. People who once clutched their purses when Jamal entered the store now simply stepped aside, unsure of what to feel. The man they feared had become part of the store's foundation. He didn't force his presence. He just showed up, did the work, went home. One evening, just before closing, a woman stood outside in the rain for several minutes. Maria eventually opened the door. "You can come in," she said gently. The woman shook her head. "I just wanted to see the place." Then she left. Inside, Jamal had just finished sweeping. Luis handed him a bottle of water, the kind he used to buy every day. "You're part of this place now," Luis said. Jamal didn't say anything, but he opened the bottle, took a sip, and tapped it gently against Luis's before setting it down. A quiet toast. A wordless belonging. By spring, the old neon sign above Manny's Market had finally given out. Luis climbed the ladder to take it down one Saturday morning. The M had been flickering for months, just a pulse of fading blue light. As he removed the screws, Jamal stood below, steadying the ladder without being asked. The sign didn't go back up. Instead, a new one was delivered a week later. Simple, clean, hand-painted by a local artist who used to ignore the store entirely. It read, M&L Market, serving the neighborhood. Watching out for it, too. The second line wasn't Maria's idea. It was Luis's. Jamal didn't comment on it. He just smiled faintly when he saw it, then got back to sweeping the sidewalk. He came early now, before the first customer, before the morning coffee had even finished brewing. The broom fit naturally in his hand. So did the delivery clipboard. The regulars had started calling him Jay, and a few even asked for his opinion on bulk pricing. But it wasn't the chores or the business that kept him coming back. It was what the store had become, a place that let him belong without demanding he explain himself first. Luis had begun to shadow him more and more, not just for restocking shelves or fixing the broken freezer, but for the way Jamal moved, deliberate, quiet, aware. He listened when Jamal spoke about pressure, about breathing, about how to step forward when you're scared instead of backing away. "I used to think strength was about size," Luis said one night while closing up. "Now I think it's about stillness." Jamal looked at him. "No," he said gently. "It's about choice." Maria still kept the sign in the window, the one she wrote after the robbery. A little weathered now, the ink faded, but she wouldn't take it down. When someone asked why, she said, "Because it reminds me what grace looks like." One afternoon, a man from a nearby precinct came in and asked Jamal if he'd ever considered working security. "You kept your cool better than most of our rookies," he said. Jamal shook his head. "I'm not looking to carry a badge." "What are you looking for?" the officer asked. Jamal looked around the store. Luis behind the counter. Maria restocking the bread shelf. Sunlight streaming through the front window, touching the floor just right. "Nothing," he said. "I think I found it." Outside, the neighborhood kept shifting. Some people still looked twice. Some never came back. But some came because of him. One evening, a boy came in clutching a crumpled sketch. A new drawing of Superman with tattoos. Jamal bent down, smiled, and said, "Looks better than me." The boy beamed. Maria watched it all from behind the counter, her heart full and quiet. Sometimes, the person you fear becomes the one who holds your world steady. Sometimes, what looks like a stranger is the beginning of your next chapter. And sometimes, not with fanfare, not with applause. A man walks into a store and changes everything. Not by being loud, but by staying.